News Now at 11.
A Clark County grand jury is taking a fresh look at the death of a local attorney and part-time judge.
Henderson police originally ruled the death of Susan Winters a suicide. But a private investigation launched by the Winters family uncovered some surprising and rather scandalous details about Winters' husband, and now the death is being investigated as a possible homicide.
George Knapp of the I-Team has the first public look at how the husband answered tough questions.
From the outside, all appears normal at the Boulder City Mental Health Clinic. Psychologist Dr. Brent still shows up a few days per week to counsel patients about emotional issues, marital woes, even drug use, subjects he knows well, according to what he revealed during a sworn deposition earlier this year.
Were you using any drugs after your wife passed away in that next week?
I can't say with certainty.
Okay, so did you engage in the use of controlled substances at or around the time of your wife's death?
Occasionally.
What is your controlled substance of choice?
Not sure I have one.
The reason for the grilling by former district attorney David Roger and his partner Tony Spro is a civil lawsuit filed in connection with the January 2015 death of Susan Winters, the doctor's wife. Susan was an energetic 48-year-old attorney and part-time judge, mother of 2 teenage girls. The marriage was stormy at times, and Susan had undergone counseling. Still, her parents could hardly believe it when they got the phone call from Brent Dennis.
He called and said, Susan has hurt herself. She's tried to commit suicide. And I said, Brent, are you sure? And he said, my God, Dan, she drank antifreeze.
But you didn't believe it from the beginning, did you?
No, I didn't. No. No.
She had 2 daughters. She loved them more than anything. If she was going to commit suicide, she certainly wouldn't have done it in front of those girls. And she certainly wouldn't have done it where it took 24 hours to accomplish.
When paramedics arrived at the Henderson home the morning of January 3rd, Susan had no pulse, but the EMTs got her heart beating again. She died hours later from a deadly combination of antifreeze and pain pills. Henderson police did a cursory investigation, interviewed the husband, and declared it a suicide. But Susan's parents say they got a weird vibe from Brent Dennis.
He called and he was telling Julie, he said, I just got through being interviewed by one of the police officers, and he said, I think I passed.
I think I passed.
That's what he said.
The family reached out to former FBI agent Jim Perry. Perry quickly discovered dark secrets about Brent Dennis. 3 to 4 times per week for a period of about a year, Dr. Dennis made trips to visit someone at the Orleans hotel. Each time, bank records show, he withdrew hundreds of dollars from an ATM machine at the hotel to buy cocaine and other drugs. He admitted as much during his deposition.
You purchase cocaine from him, you ingest it right there on the spot instead of taking it with you to ingest it later.
It varied.
So sometimes you did it on the spot.
Yes.
It's cocaine, it's alcohol, it's oxycodone, it's methamphetamine, it's Valium, it's a whole menu worth of stuff. And the ATM withdrawals are pretty much in line with what he made every month as a psychologist.
So he'd spend all of it?
He spent all of it.
Why focus on the doctor's drug use? Because of what Scrow found once he subpoenaed the family's phone records. Those records show that 2 days before Susan died, she repeatedly tried to contact her husband's drug dealer, possibly to warn him to stop. And Scrow says she also confronted her husband and threatened to report him to the medical board.
When Susan says to her husband, if you don't stop using drugs, I'm going to report you to the board. Things quickly unravel from that point. They start fighting, they start arguing, and Susan would be dead within about 2 or 3 days from that series of events.
Scrow says the phone records also show that on the last night of Susan Winters' life, as she lay unconscious and in pain, her husband called his drug dealer in the wee hours, then traveled to the Orleans. A few hours later, sometime after 5 a.m., someone used the family computer to search for information about the effects of antifreeze poisoning. More on that in our next report. George Knapp, 8 News Now.
Now, no charges have been filed, but Henderson police reopened the case earlier this year, and the district attorney plans to present evidence to a Clark County grand jury. The alleged drug dealer was arrested on narcotics charges. Dr. Dennis declined to speak to us, but his attorney, Richard Schoenfeld, told us the only reason the case is being reviewed is because Susan Winter's parents cannot accept the fact that their daughter took her own life, adding that there is exculpatory evidence in other depositions.
Is breaking news from 8 News Now.
Brand new details this evening. A local psychologist whose wife died a year ago under suspicious circumstances may have his bank accounts frozen at the request of the dead woman's family. Thanks for joining us live at 5. I'm Dave Courvoisier.
And I'm Denise Valdez. The request was submitted to a judge earlier today, asking the court to prevent Dr. Brent Dennis from liquidating his assets now that he's the focus of a homicide investigation. George Knapp of the I-Team is here with this exclusive story tonight.
Again, Dr. Dennis has not been charged with a crime, but as we reported last week, Henderson homicide detectives, as well as the DA and a grand jury, are looking into the death of his wife, Susan Winters. She died in January of last year after ingesting a combination of pain pills and antifreeze. It was ruled a suicide after a cursory investigation, but Susan's parents didn't believe it, so they hired investigators and a local law firm to take a closer look. What they uncovered was a pattern of suspicious behavior and illicit drug use. The family attorney says the husband reaped a financial bonanza after Susan Winters' death.
We have reason to believe that when Susan passed away, Brent Dennis personally didn't have a whole lot of money. After Susan passed away, he stood to gain some real estate. He stood to gain about $2 million in cash. And his financial picture adjusted quite nicely.
Documents submitted to a district court this afternoon are seeking a freeze on bank accounts and other assets. The papers outline that Brent Dennis received $1 million from Susan's life insurance policy, plus cash and assets, including her interest in 3 real estate properties. The family thinks there is a risk that he might liquidate the assets and possibly flee. Again, Dr. Dennis has not been charged with a crime. The state board, which licenses psychologists, is reviewing a complaint about his use of illicit drugs. His attorney told us this is all the result of Susan's parents being unable to accept that their daughter took her own life. And tonight at 11, we'll hear from Dr. Dennis himself, exclusive excerpts from his sworn deposition. The new documents will be posted at some point on our website.
Interesting development tonight.
Yes.
Look forward to the report at 11.
Okay.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, George.
Local psychologist is charged with murdering his wife, originally thought to have taken her own life. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Denise Valdez.
And I'm Dave Courvoisier. Well, after a lengthy 2-year investigation, Henderson police say they have enough evidence to show Gregory Brent Dennis killed his wife, Susan Winters. 8 News Now reporter Mauricio Marin has more on what's most shocking about this case. Mauricio?
Good evening. Throughout this entire ordeal, the Winters family insisted Susan, an attorney in Las Vegas, did not commit suicide. They told us they got a weird vibe from her husband, Dennis, which led them to believe he was responsible for her death. Well, according to police, their hunch proved to be something with new evidence pointing to him as a murderer.
When you're on the right side of something, so long as you're patient, it'll eventually go your way.
It's been a long time coming for the Winters family after losing Susan Winters 2 years ago. At first, the death of the Las Vegas attorney was ruled a suicide, found to have had antifreeze and painkillers in her system. But her family wasn't buying it and turned to a private investigator.
They are so relieved and so restored in their faith in terms of the justice system that it actually can work. And while to them it seemed to take forever.
The family's attorney tells us Gregory Brent Dennis, a psychologist, managed to maintain his license to practice even though he was at the center of a murder investigation. And it was believed he used cocaine and other drugs before seeing patients. Information that came to light during testimony when the family filed a civil lawsuit against him.
He's a licensed clinical psychologist. He was able to mask a drug addiction for years. Up until today, he still had patients he was seeing. So yeah, I think he thinks he can talk his way out of anything.
The family believes his drug abuse could have played a factor in why he may have wanted to murder Susan. They had a rocky relationship, and she may have threatened to report his drug abuse. Red flags started to pop up when detectives noticed inconsistencies in his story about what happened the night she died. At first saying he was home asleep for most of the night after a confrontation with his wife. saying he approached her about finding an online search on the family computer for information about how to commit suicide by swallowing antifreeze, then awoke to her not breathing beside him the next morning. But then texts and phone calls show he may have been somewhere else, meeting with a drug dealer. A big inconsistency, according to the Winters family attorney, saying he actually returned to watch Winters die after picking up drugs. Tonight, though, the victim's family is just glad he's behind bars after getting word from the district attorney's office saying he'll be facing murder.
We certainly believed that the time was ripe for an arrest. We believed that the information was there that supported an arrest, so we were very relieved this morning when we finally got that call.
Now, Dennis is currently behind bars without bail, according to jail records. He's scheduled to make his first court appearance early next week. Back to you.
Mauricio, good evening. A local psychologist is behind bars tonight, charged with the murder of his wife, a death that was originally labeled as a suicide. Good evening, I'm Denise Valdez.
And I'm Dave Cravassier. Attorney Susan Winters was found dead back in January 2015. Her husband, Dr. Brent Dennis, helped convince police she had taken her own life. But the Winters family never bought it. The I-Team has covered the story since last year. George Knapp is here with the latest twist. George.
Dave, the Winters family was certain from day one that Susan Winters did not take her own life, and they were pretty sure Susan's husband, Brent Dennis, was somehow responsible for her death. Early this morning, Henderson police arrested Dr. Dennis for the murder of his wife. When lawyer Susan Winters was found dead in her Henderson home, January 2015, her grieving husband told police his wife had searched the family computer for information about how to commit suicide by swallowing antifreeze. The Winters family didn't buy it. They hired Las Vegas lawyers Tony Scrow and David Roger, the former DA, to look into it. As the I-Team reported previously, an investigation found that Dr. Dennis led a secret life, was a regular user of illegal drugs, and that his marriage was in trouble. In our exclusive footage of his sworn deposition, he had trouble keeping his story straight. A report from the law firm convinced police to reopen the case. The DA's office obtained electronic records which show that Susan Winters was probably near death when her computer was used to search for information about antifreeze. Also uncovered was evidence that Dr. Dennis allegedly tried to get an expert to scrub that computer. This afternoon, we spoke to attorney Tony Scrow, who had jousted with Dr. Dennis during the civil deposition.
He does not have an appreciation for inconsistencies in his story, what he told the police, what he told us under oath, how different those versions of events are. I think today might be the first time he actually appreciates that if you get caught in a series of lies, it may catch up with you.
As mentioned, Dr. Dennis was arrested early this morning. The state also seized his assets worth about $800,000. Tony Scrow says he made the call to inform the Winters family and says they are greatly relieved to know this day has finally arrived. Prior to the arrest today, the I-Team was working on follow-up stories detailing how Dr. Dennis benefited financially from his wife's death and the inconsistencies in his phone records that have now contributed to his arrest. Those details will be coming in the days ahead.
All right,
a local psychologist accused of murdering his wife posted $250,000 bail today after making his first court appearance early this morning. Thanks for joining us tonight at 6 o'clock. I'm Paul Johnsich.
And I'm Christiane Klein. Dr. Brent Dennis was arrested Thursday, charged with killing his wife, attorney Susan Winters, 2 years ago. Now, among those who were in Henderson Justice Court this morning were Susan's parents.
The I-Team's George Knapp has followed this story since last year. He's here with the latest now.
You know, for Dan and Avis Winters, this day was a long time coming. If not for a private investigation they initiated, there would be no charges of any kind against their former son-in-law. The parents made a point to be in court for the first appearance by Dr. Brent Dennis, accused of murdering his wife Susan in January 2015 by poisoning her with a lethal combination of pain pills and antifreeze. The death was initially ruled as suicide after Henderson police spent less than 2 hours investigating the circumstances. A private investigation supervised by attorneys Tony Scrow and David Roger uncovered numerous discrepancies in the story told by Brent Dennis. That report, which detailed the doctor's illicit drug habits and the nearly $2 million he stood to gain if Susan died, led police to reopen the case. Susan's parents told us today that phone and computer records suggest the murder may have been planned months before Susan's death.
All the computer searches and stuff that he did back in the fall he was setting it all up at that point. When he started running out of money on the with the cocaine deal, he was spending more than he was taking in for a long time, and it finally caught up with him. And I think Susan told him she was going to turn him in, and he finally believed her, and he didn't have any choice. He just felt like that's his.
He did have a choice.
Well, but he felt like that was his way out, and he couldn't afford to get a divorce because he's going to lose everything if he got a divorce.
The Winters say they tried to make eye contact with Dr. Dennis in court this morning, but he never looked their way. Their civil attorney, Tony Scrow, says the probate suit that they filed is on hold for now, but that the main reason it was filed at all was to get Brent Dennis under oath and on the record. Information obtained by Henderson Police and the DA's office suggests that someone else may have helped in the murder. We will have more on that and more from our interviews with the Winters family in the days ahead.
Plot thickens. Thanks, George. A Wendy about what will happen to the patients of the psychologist accused of killing his own wife. Dr. Brent Dennis is out on bail, but his license to practice has been suspended. 8 News Now reporter Karen Castro is live outside his clinic in Boulder City with what she learned today. Karen?
And Paul, the clinic is still open, and from what we've been able to gather, other psychologists who work here are still taking patients, but getting answers from anyone at the clinic has been difficult. We tried walking inside only to be asked to leave. We've even tried calling.
Doctor's office, this is Sue. Hi, Sue. This is Karen. I'm with Channel 8. I have a quick question for you. Wanted to know if you guys...
Now, his website is also down. A message says it's due to scheduled maintenance and that it will be working shortly. Now, we've been trying to get on the website all day, and as of a few minutes ago, it's still down. Meanwhile, the Nevada Board of Psychological Examiners is advising Dennis's patients to call his office to figure out what they're doing to accommodate them. The board says it's common for doctors to have a plan in case they can no longer practice for whatever reason. Now, if patients are not getting answers, they can file a complaint directly with the board. In fact, that's exactly what the family of the doctor's dead wife did back in 2015. Now, the parents of Susan Winters had their suspicions following the death and filed a civil lawsuit against Dr. Dennis. And here's what Winters' father told the I-Team about efforts to get the board to take action.
He has no business counseling people that are coming to him in pain, in need of help and all that. And I guarantee you, he's a psychologist because that gives him the ability to do what he loves doing, which is control people's minds.
Now, the board will hold a hearing within the next 45 days to review information they obtained from the Henderson Police Department. Attorneys for Dr. Dennis intend to argue against the suspension. Now, if you were a patient of Dr. Dennis, we want to hear from you. Make sure to contact the I-Team by going to LasVegasNow.com. We're live in Boulder City. Karen Castro, 8 News Now.
Thank you, Karen.